Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a bright and wise 20-year-old son who is working hard to launch as an adult. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. And I'm also a certified coach helping primarily adoptive parents. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Well, today we have a very special podcast episode for you. We have two previous guests that have been on the pod before. Leslie Mackinnon and Miyoak Icaro are here. I will link their previous episodes in the show notes if you want to go back and hear them. They've also appeared with me on different panels, one online and one at the Untangling Our Roots Summit, talking about sacred plant medicine. So this will be the topic for today. We'll be talking about how sacred plant medicine has helped each of us individually and how we have a vision for the plant medicine helping to engage and coalesce the whole adoption constellation. So welcome, Miyoak and Leslie. I'm so glad to have you here together on this little mini roundtable. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
And I'm going to let Miyoak be the moderator today. The adoptee is going to have the lead voice here in this little group, as it should be. And she's going to just walk us through some ideas around sacred plant medicine and our relationship to it from the adoption constellation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Beth. Yeah, I really liked this idea of having the plants guide us in this space because we have this amazing connection to something that's beyond us, that's bigger than us, and can give us this really powerful context for both our healing, and then we can see our interconnectedness for better or for worse, and how, to some degree, we can really help each other heal and be a part of everyone else's evolution in this life. And so why don't we start off with just introducing ourselves? Leslie, if you want to tell us who you are.
Yes, Leslie Pate Mackinnon. I've been around in the adoption community for a mighty long time. I'm a birth mother ×2, and my story is in the girls who went away, meaning I relinquished 2 sons for adoption, which just magnified my shame, doubled it. But I got into the adoption reform world, or really coming out of the fog, as we all use that phrase, because first mothers have to come out of the fog too, believe you me. And I did that as I decided and began to search for my sons. I realized that I needed to learn a lot more about this. And I was in that place where many of us were, thinking that adoption was a good thing. And it was a very painful journey coming out of the fog. But I've been in reunion now for 26 years. And I was searching for about 4 years before that. So that gives you a kind of framework for how long I've been here and in the community. And I was a therapist already, but I didn't work anywhere near adoption because it was too painful and too repressed. And once I got my fog dimmed down and learned as much as I possibly could, then my practice specialty became adoption and also third-party reproduction, because we've got an awful lot in common with that community that also gets separated from their biological heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Great. Thanks so much, Leslie. How about you, Beth? Who are you?
Hey, so I'm an adoptive mom. I adopted my son when he was an infant from Japan and didn't really understand adoption trauma at all and thought everything was just fine. He doesn't know the difference. I was super naive. I meant well, but I just didn't know. I didn't understand the depth of my son's pain until he was 15 and tried to kill himself. And we found out he had been struggling with cannabis use and psychedelics for a couple of years before I knew it. So we've been, for the last 5 or 6 years, on the struggle bus with him. And it's been a major process of learning. For me, I learned about adoption trauma. I learned about addiction. I learned about codependency. I learned about healing my own wounds so I could be more present and more helpful for my son, because both of us spinning around was not a good look for anyone. And I've dug deeply into adoption trauma and learning as much as I can so I can help my son and myself heal, actually, honestly. And it's been wonderful getting to know people in the Constellation. Leslie was one of the first people that reached out to me after we had our podcast, and she's been so helpful to me, and Miyoak has been so influential to me as well. So I appreciate both of you and the viewpoints and the wisdom, the perspectives that you have given me. So thank you very much for being in my world and helping me learn every day.
Oh, thanks so much, Beth.
The best gift from this journey in adoption has been you guys.
Yeah.
Oh. I'm Mee Ok. I'm a psychedelic advisor and consultant and book doula and life coach. I'm also a Korean adoptee. And I started my adoption journey, I guess, when I got sick. And I realized I didn't have any medical background history. And so I think had that not happened, I would have been one of those adoptees who never went back or really explored, perhaps. And then actually the plants kind of guided me in my journey after that. But we can get to that in a minute. I think the first thing I wanted to ask was just for all of us to speak to what made us pursue plant medicines in the first place, because it's obviously not something everybody does. It is something that more and more people are opening up to and becoming curious about. But I think maybe we were some of the earlier onboarders. So yeah, Leslie, what got you into it?
And I'd love to say that it was the pursuit of plant medicine that drew me. That wasn't initially it. I had been on SSRIs, which are Prozac, Wellbutrin, a big group of antidepressants for 25 years. And I wanted off because I didn't like what they had done to me in terms of kind of tamping down my feelings over the years. So I was interested in getting off of a medication. And then as I looked at that, I started to evaluate, well, maybe this would be a good time to look at doing a journey, or I wonder if that would accelerate me getting off of the medication and help me to still be working on things. What stood out to me was when I went to search for my sons almost 30 years ago, I quit drinking because I knew I needed to feel what was going to get brought up. I had never felt it. And I think that's what I'm trying to say to you about being on the antidepressants. They did make me feel better in a way, but I also felt very tamped down. I didn't cry. You can see a Hallmark commercial and I used to could boohoo, but I didn't cry at almost anything. And there were just feelings that were so tamped down. So I was hoping this was going to be a more natural way to access my feelings. And it has been. And they haven't all been pleasant, mind you, but I can certainly access them much better now.
Interesting. So you primarily took them to help wean off antidepressants.
I had weaned, but I wasn't feeling great having weaned. And I took it kind of as an adjunct to say, I wonder if this would help me feel a little better and get into deeper work. And both of those things did happen. But there was a long period of time of not feeling good, which I'll talk about a little further when you are asking a question.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Beth, what got you into it?
Well, several years ago, I read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. That was fascinating. I'd heard him, on his book tour, and I was just curious. Then I found out my son had used LSD and DMT quite extensively, and it almost killed him because he tried to kill himself because he wanted to stay on that other side. He was using them by himself in his bedroom, which I do not recommend. Don't do that. We almost lost him several times because of that. But for some reason, I didn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, okay, I know that the way he did that was not safe, but he had some amazing journeys, some really terrifying ones too. And I was just very curious. And I, like Leslie, have been on antidepressants for 25 years and still feel depressed. So they seemed not to be working. And I also kept trying to get off of them, and I got suicidal and I just felt stuck. So I decided to go on a mushroom journey, psilocybin, underground. I'm a super goody two shoes. I've never been drunk in my whole life. I don't do anything. I'm super straight. Well, not straight, but like I don't use drugs. But I went and did this underground journey and it changed my life. It was transformative. It was like the before the journey and after the journey. My life was divided into like that, And then more recently, I started using ketamine through my doctor. This one was not underground. This was through my doctor. And I am completely in remission from depression and off all of my antidepressants now. So I'm very grateful that I didn't just say, oh my God, these almost killed my son. They're terrible. They're evil. I'm never going to touch them. I guess because I read Michael Pollan's book, I knew that it wasn't literally the psychedelics that was killing him. It was kind of the format, the context around him. Somehow that got into my head. And I'm very optimistic about the possibilities for continued healing for myself, perhaps for my son in the future, and for lots of people that have these kind of deep issues that seem to be unresolvable, that perhaps the plants can help.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I was on antidepressants for about 10 years, but I got off of them long before I ever thought about plant medicines at all. And that was really, really difficult to get off just because I was so sensitive. We actually had to transition me to a different antidepressant on liquid form because in a pill form, I couldn't decrease on small enough increments to actually get off. But I had been off antidepressants for quite some time before I ever worked with plant medicines. And yeah, I did it for physical health reasons. I had a very serious illness. I was very close to death, and there was no options for me in the Western medicine world. And so I sprung for ayahuasca, and the rest is history. And at the time, I had no idea. I didn't know why it would work. I mean, everything was explained to me on a physiological level. So it was like, oh yeah, it resets your immune system. There's some neuroscientific things that'll, the dendrites in your brain or whatever, other science words, lots of science words will happen to you. And so I never at the time imagined that I would be going into adoption stuff. That was really surprising to me. So I'm interested to hear more about how these medicines have worked with you in relation to your journey through adoption. Do either of you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. One of the things that's been big for me, and I didn't know it was coming, I knew I had a lot of body trauma because as I've gone through some things in my adoption journey, my coming out of the fog, my reunion, and afterwards, I had a lot of bodily reactions, but I didn't know what to do with them. I had pain in certain places. I had sciatica. I couldn't move one leg. There were different things that happened. And that's been one of the joys of doing the plant medicine is I'm accessing more information about my body. The medicine lets me know how these different body parts got activated in pain. So that's really helping me find a way out of that. I kind of had to understand it somehow in order to work my way through it. And I just love that. It's not just about my psychological trauma, but it's about my body trauma. So I think that's one of the big things. And also that it's given me a way to access myself with compassion rather than judgment and recrimination, which is, even though I was in psychotherapy, I swear forever, this was a way that I was coming towards myself in a much softer, kinder way. Not that the psychotherapy meant to do anything else, but it just didn't work that way for me. Somehow the medicine has allowed me to soften and understand and clarify some things about myself. And it's just feels so much better than, like I said, beating myself with that old stick, as a lot of us do in this space. So,
Leslie, are you willing to talk about your sciatica and what you realized about that?
Oh, I'm glad to mention that. That one piece is one of my most recent. I just did a month-long ketamine journeys once a week. And what I realized was I went back with my group and went through the birth process. I delivered my second son alone by myself. And I've said that, but I never shared the details because they're horrifying and scary, even to this day. But in this journey, I did. And then it came to me that, That's where I had been pushing and pushing with this hip. I mean, the minute I started to talk about the birth, I could feel myself pushing. And after that, what came about was I did deliver him and all was well, thank heavens, with him. But then I pushed and pushed for years to redeem myself to my family, to the public. I am a good girl. I am a good person. Look how hard I work. I became a social worker. I'm going to be the best in my field. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. But it was always push, 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 do more, and let people know that you're a good human being. So this has allowed me to say, hey, you are a good human being. You can relax a little. You don't have to push so hard. And in fact, that's some of what the latest work has been is, sit back, be a little more quiet, just relax. You're okay. You don't have to work for this. It's been huge for me.
Beautiful.
And has the physical healing occurred?
Oh, yes. I'm knocking on wood. But yes, the physical, I've stayed without the sciatica now for as long as I have for the last couple of months, and it's much better. Yeah.
Amazing. Beth, what has plant medicines done in terms of helping you with your own healing regarding your relationship with adoption?
So for me, it's been about digging into my ancestry a bit. It turns out there's a bunch of adoption in my relatives. My great-grandmother abandoned her daughter, my grandmother, and there was a lot of stigma and shame attached to that. She was a young mom with a very rich boyfriend who abandoned them both, and just so much shame. And it has passed down to me that shame of body, shame about sex, shame about being a woman, just a lot. And I realized in my mushroom journey, the depression I felt my whole life is not really depression, it was repression. And I saw this picture of all the female relatives along the line, like 10 of them in a row, just chained together by the patriarchy or whatever. And just like, we are just passing this from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And that the depression I felt, it wasn't like depression, it was, and not to minimize depression, it's a serious thing. But in my case, I had this bigger picture of what it was. And it was this societal impact and religion and patriarchy and abuse and just things that have flowed from one generation to the next. And I have also had some small conversations with Joey kind of in the spirit world. I don't know how to say that, but there have been some things that have happened with Joey, and it has helped me tremendously to understand why Joey was drawn to using those medicines, even though he was using them in a scary, scary way. But yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it, what he was looking for. He and I talk about it sometimes. I try not to trigger him by talking about it too much, but he's able to talk to me about his journeys. I'm able to tell him a little bit about mine, and it's given us a point of connection for sure that hopefully over the years will grow.
So I'm hearing a lot of compassion for self and others going on with this.
Yeah, no wonder Joey wanted to do this stuff. It feels really good, and it allowed him to see, he met his birth mother on one of his journeys and get this giant hug from the universe. Well, who wouldn't want that? Come on. Yeah. I totally get it. And hopefully he can find it in a safer way in the future, and we can educate parents. Like, for instance, I didn't know kids are vaping DMT. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. You can't vape everything, but you can vape DMT.
Yep.
And that is terrifying to me.
I have some in my drawer right here. But if you do it in the right, there's a way to do it.
Yeah, of course.
There's a way to do all these things.
Yeah, like anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find that for me, what is really powerful about these medicines is that in our sort of regular brain state, we're having very subjective experiences. Mm-hmm. And this allowed me to go into other consciousnesses, and it would open a space that was impossible here in this world and the reality and the limitations that we have here. And I remember one of my first ceremonies where adoption was kind of dealt with head on. My mother and my birth mother were actually able to enter the space together and have this conversation with each other that never could have happened in life. And it was interesting because it was sort of on this spiritual level. And it was funny because I was there, but they weren't there for me. They were there to talk to each other. I was like at the kids' table and they were at the adult table doing the adult talk. But I really just got to watch them connect and express gratitude for each other,
Nice.
for caring for me. And, I was the baton that got handed over. And to also see our connectedness, I remember seeing my uterus and then seeing their uteruses and then seeing their ancestral lineages all the way back, just all of these uteruses stretching back through time until they met at a common ancestor.
Oh, really?
And it was just this really powerful connection. And of course, it was ayahuasca. So that's exactly when I vomited. And then it was just clarity. And these things that had been so separate to me before that moment were together and coherent and cohesive. And so, really, what the plants have done a lot for me is both bringing things into a wholeness while also helping me make really fine discernments between the two. Like when the shamans are cleaning my blood, I know exactly what is Korean about me and what is not. And then when they're cleaning kind of the energies around me, like I guess you would describe it as an aura or something, I'm seeing like, oh, that was nurture. Because that's when all this Irish and German stuff and French stuff is showing up. And I'm like, oh, this is like my Caucasian European lineages going on. So a lot of those things are very, very clear to me now that I don't think would have been so easy to get to without the plants.
So sometimes in these spaces, it seems like adoptive parents, people wish we would just not exist and just go away. And like I was told this week, I'm not even a parent,
right?
All sorts of stuff. But through your journey, you can see both sides, the nurture and the nature, and they're both so present. And that perhaps the work that I do on myself as an adoptive parent might somehow help Joey in his journey.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that if all of our parents fix their stuff, then none of us would be in therapy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even necessarily matter if it's the biological mother or just people who raised you, who taught you things. So blood is important, but I think we often don't have a very healthy boundary with that and often attribute a lot to blood that is not. And vice versa. So the fact that those things are confused can be really difficult on an adoptee, just that overemphasis. But
well, I throw in there too, and this comes from my more generic therapeutic background. Kids want their parents to love each other. And I've said this over the years when parents are divorcing, don't take that out on your child, your feelings about the other. Just express love because you're talking to the other half. And I know when I met my first son's mother, and after we had coffee a few times, she said, oh, now there'll always be somebody here to love him, because she was much older. And I said, you bet, because you were there to love him when I was not able. And this is a job we're doing together. We also have another job in this community, I think many of us feel after we get in it for a while, to change what doesn't seem to be a very good working system. But we need to remember that that's another job. We're not changing that right now. We are also holding love for this child. And if we really love the child, we're going to learn to love each other, because that's what the child needs. They can hate us anytime they want to and say, oh, we should shut up. But they need us to love each other. And that is just a basic bottom minimum. So I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, the plant medicine space too does kind of give us a better direct access to when we were children, because it's such a different logic than now. And often, especially with talk therapy, we don't allow ourselves to go into emotional spaces that we can't justify or rationalize with our adult minds. And so it's funny when you said that, Leslie, I was remembering one of my most recent ceremonies that I had where I just had to cry over my adoptive parents' divorce, even though it was a nasty marriage and my adoptive father was abusing me and it was just not a great situation. It's still, I saw that in my child's heart, that there was something really sad about that because I wanted mommy and daddy. Something very young was really wounded, even though my adult mind was like, yeah, get out of there.
Right.
But it allows you to go underneath that. Whereas in our regular states, that's often just such a powerful block that you can't get to the emotions. So when you decided to pursue plant medicines, what were some of the things that you needed to have in place support wise? And where did you kind of need to be before that was going to be a really safe experience that you could actually let yourself have?
Well, one thing I say, and remember, I'm going to be speaking, I'm an elder birth mother. I'm from the BSE era. And so, for any listeners that are from that era, one of the things I think is important for us to remember, because I was a little goofy when I first thought about the plant medicine too, is I'd done a little plant medicine in my early days, not medicinally, thank you, for fun. And there was a part of me that was like, oh, that was cool. I'll get to do that again. And I wonder what amazing things I'll say. Well, what I try to tell other moms, but anybody, is do your homework. Read, research. Michael Pollan, I watched the movie, I read the big thick book. To me, that was one of the easiest reads and so fascinating and covered a wide variety. And there are many, many other things, but don't go about this lightly. This is not for recreation. This is for deep work. And it comes from a long history that Miyoak has taught me a lot more about. We need to be very responsible about it, but it is the thing of doing your homework, getting your treatment team set up on the side, have an adoption competent therapist at some point. They may not be leading your journey, but have them there if some of these issues come up that you want to work on later. I think it's important to have qualified people like Miyoak or people who have really spent some time and know what they're doing with these journeys. I see a lot of people getting trained, and I'm sure you could say more about that than I could, Miyoak, that it makes me a little nervous. I wouldn't journey with just anybody. I'd get a lot of research done on whatever group I chose to work with. And the other thing that was important for me, but it may not be for everybody, is the community. And I think a lot of these journeys somehow can occur in a community. And to me, that's been half of the healing too, which has been true about the adoption community. But in this medicine realm, that community holds me while I'm trying to process, wow, in such many different ways, and other people going through it with me. That's irreplaceable to me. So I'm much of the community aspect.
So all these things that you mentioned, these are all things that you did for yourself to get where you needed to be before you were able to start?
I did a lot of homework. I did a lot of researching who I would work with. I could have done it solo, and I have done a solo journey or two, don't get me wrong, since then, which has been magnificent. But I lean towards doing group journeys because I just find that works so well personally for me. But do a lot of homework. You can't do too much. You're worth it. And you want it to work as well as you can, and you want to have people there to support you, because this work goes on and on and on after the journey. I did a journey about 10 days ago, and it's still, things are bubbling up. And I'll call one of the people in my group and say, wow, I just discovered this black snake in me or something. And they understand what I'm talking about. My next door neighbor wouldn't. So
yeah, sometimes it takes years to integrate, and life is a ceremony. You get the party started.
That's right.
And there's things to do on this side of things. And
that's right.
How about you, Beth?
Well, before I did my mushroom journey, I had several sessions with the guide ahead of time and then several sessions afterwards. And my wife went with me, not for the actual journey, but it was out of town. So she went with me for the weekend and was there right afterwards. And she's been very supportive. And I've always had a therapist on the side. And with the ketamine I'm doing right now, they don't provide any therapeutic anything, which is really sort of terrible. But for me, it's okay because I have enough support around me, people that understand the plant medicine and my other therapist, and I'm doing EMDR right now. And so I am going at it very intentionally. Like she says, I don't know, you can just, listen to music or watch TV or whatever you want to do on your phone or whatever. She doesn't care what you do. But I'm like, nah, I'm using this time. This is opening a portal. I'm not just going to waste it and just kind of let it ooze in there. So So I write out questions before I take the medicine. And then afterwards, when I'm kind of waking up and able to write again, I journal real free and my hand just kind of writes stuff. I don't even know what it's writing. It's pretty incredible. So I'm using it more therapeutically than probably some of her patients do.
What about your first time when you decided to find the underground mushroom therapist?
Yeah.
Where did you have to be and what had to be in place for you to be able to enter that first time space?
Yeah, that was a couple of years after Joey's initial crisis, and I was doing my deep dive into this adoption trauma stuff. I was in deep therapy. I was in search mode. I was reading all the books. I was just on like self-improvement highway. It was like, give me all the things. Tell me what I need to do. Obviously, I've done things wrong or I'm not on the right track. I was depressed and also my son was having such a hard time. So I was just like open. I'm like, okay, just tell me what to do. I was just so seeking. I still am. But at that time, I was particularly just like desperate for some sort of transformation to happen. But I got referred to this person by a dear friend that has helped my son, and I vetted them very carefully, and I felt really comfortable with it. And you're in a vulnerable position. In this case, I was up in a mountain town, far from home, in some guy's guest house. I mean, shit could have gone down, but it didn't. He was a quality type person, but it's very important for people to be careful. I think that can't be stressed enough.
And I'd give a tip that somebody gave me for when I was first, how are you going to research this? How are you going to do it? Most cities of size have psychedelic organizations. And someone said to me, just look for a psychedelic organization, kind of grassroots group. And there were people there that offered journeys. There were guides, there were therapists, there were people who had gone. And so I went to those groups for months, and you can learn a lot. Again, they're a plethora of information and they give talks on different aspects. And that's where you need to go. And I did meet my guide there, and I knew. I mean, I met him and I just knew, and I knew, and I knew I felt fine and went all the way through it with him, and it was right. But I knew it. There was just no doubt. And I trust that when it comes and hits me that hard on the head, and it did. But I think those organizations are really wonderful places to get more information, to see what the psychedelic community is about. And that doesn't mean you should trust every single person sitting there, by no means, but it's a good way to get into the world of psychedelics.
Yeah, it's funny. Something I've been thinking about lately is the more I have these public conversations, I think about the private conversations that I have with people. And the more I realize that real life happens off the record. And especially with these medicines, it's so much about where the person is that there's really only so much you can speak about publicly, because when you don't know who the audience is, anybody could be listening, that there's just a barrier that you can't break for a number of reasons. Some things are just sacred, some things are just for initiates and so forth. But I knew that I needed to be connected to and really listen to people who aren't necessarily people running around being in the public, people who are doing real medicine work. And that's pretty much where they live. And they leave it up to others to go and educate the public, and they help those who get it enough to come see them. And so I had some really solid advice and people who understood that I was in a really different situation than most people coming to medicine and could really just help me. I was not particularly skilled or had a lot of experience in that space. And so it's kind of like, okay, you've never eaten a meal, and now you're going to be cooking one for yourself. So here's some ideas,
But you did it by yourself at first, right?
Yeah. And so they were telling me really strange things like, have a plant around. It might end up talking to you, and you're going to want maybe a plant to talk to while you're, just things that didn't make sense at the time that make perfect sense now. To find a sacred object. And I'm like, what even is that? What's a sacred object to have around? So I just, had a picture of my mom and my dog, and people who had enough experience with the medicine to say, yeah, you should drink alone. This is the situation that's been handed to you. If I were you, I think it's better than not drinking and then just dying. So
Those are your choices, right?
Yeah, even if you aren't going to live, this is an experience to have before you go. It's going to make when you do leave a lot better. And so I felt like I really had access to the sort of non-above ground folks to really guide me. And so it was important to have not only because there wasn't really a Michael Pollan yet and all of that, but it was important to me to do as much online research that I could, but also to get to the people who are like kind of back channeled areas of this medicine as well to get the real information. Now, working with plants and being in this community longer than I have for sure, what needed to happen in terms of your healing with plant medicine to get you to the place where you felt like you could enter a collective healing space in a constructive way?
Part of that was having entered the adoption community, still under wraps, where I had been holding secrets for so many years, and finding out that letting them go and sharing them with other people. And guess what? Everybody didn't run from the room. It was me and my feeling about me that I was projecting. And I realized the more I shared who I really was, it sounds so corny, but the truth will set you free. It was like, I just started losing pounds. And so then when I first got into this psychedelic work, it was kind of like, here I go again. I have to be careful because as I was starting to, people were like, now don't tell anybody who I told you and what name and who and where. So that's like I said, I went to these groups and I learned a lot and I read and I researched. But I thought, I'm going to talk about this too. This isn't for everybody. I don't even know where it's taking me yet entirely, but I'm going to be open about what I am and what I'm doing. And if it helps somebody else, that's great. It helps me to be open about who I am and what I'm finding out. And I just think that's really important. So I will say the adoption community opened me up initially to be more of who I was authentically. And the medicines are doing more of that. And I thought, stay on that same train, girl. It's gotten you some good places. Don't get off now.
Wow. So a real synergy between the plants and those communities as well as your adoption community.
Yes.
Great. And then can I ask too, because specifically you are in the first or birth mother space. And so in terms of expanding out of that cocoon into hanging out with adoptees like me and adoptive parents like Beth, what was maybe a deciding factor or a place that you found within yourself where that could really be expanded in a meaningful way?
And I will say, when I came into the adoption community, one of the things that was a surprise to me and is to many people was the anger and the vitriol and the, it's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. And I was like, I could get it with that. I could have feelings like that too. Don't mistake me. I wasn't above it by any means, but it was like, this isn't rational. This isn't real. And we're all fighting with each other. And what could happen if we could understand each other a little bit? And maybe as a therapist, I worked with adoptive families. I worked with adoptees. I wasn't one of those, but I saw they were hurting worse, if not as much as me. And so we're all hurting. And can we figure out a way to not blame each other for the hurting, but maybe extend that compassion I've gotten through the medicine to one another? Because then think how powerful we can be if we can work together. And I think what the anger in the community is so much about is what people have felt like was done to us without a lot of thought. And we can change that, but we got to work together to change it. And that's why I do reach out when I saw Beth in the community. When I see somebody new from a place, I try to reach out and say, welcome. And can we find a way to work together? How can I do that with you? And I may step on your toes. And I think adoptees and you being at the head of this ship, Miyoak, is where it needs to be. You are the privileged voice. But I want to remind some of the newer adoptees just coming in now, there are other voices that can be heard too. You lead the fray. You take us. That's fine. That's as it should be. But we have some fairly important things to add on too. So nobody needs to be X'd out. We all need to work as together as we can. But I don't have any trouble with the pecking order. And I want the adoptees who never got to speak. I've said forever, you guys are the recipients of this gift of adoption. So why don't you tell us how gifted it was, how it really worked for you?
Yeah, I totally agree with it.
Yeah, Beth, you're in they call it the AP space, the adoptive parent space. And for you to enter the collective space in the way that you have, and I know that you get plenty of shit, but you also do have something unusual, which is the respect of a lot of adoptees.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, how did plant medicine help you, or how did you know that it was time to go into that healing collective space where you could actually be helpful and not another epic adoptive parent in that space, frustrating people?
I don't know the answer to that. I feel like I'm being led to more collaboration. I feel like my role is to bring people together and to highlight adoptee voices, but to do it in a collaborative way. And honestly, when I originally started this work, I thought I would be working with adoptive parents pretty exclusively. I thought, okay, I've learned some things. Let me help other adoptive parents. I have some adoptive parents that have been very loyal and follow me, but the majority has been more this collaboration, which it was not on my agenda, but I'm loving it. And I'm always humbled when an adoptee is willing to be in space with me, and a birth parent too. I don't know, maybe the plant medicine has helped me to have a broader vision for this whole thing, that there's healing that all of us need to do. Hell, adoptive parents are dealing with so much. We're watching our kids self-destruct over here. That's traumatic. And many of us have our infertility issues, whatever attachment wounds we had that we've passed along to our kids. We have plenty to work on our own side. And I think that there can be so much more that can be done when we're together. And I was almost going to say then separate, but I think we also need our separate spaces. We need to be able to complain about the other people, the other contingents, and go, oh my God, can you believe? And I think that's okay too. But there's something we can do together. And if we want to change this adoption system, I think it has to be together. And I think adoptive parents, we can use our traditionally privileged voice, our hierarchy. That's who most people used to listen to, is adoptive parents. Well, hello, let's use that. Kind of like how white people can ally with people of color. But we can use the power that we have for good to help make things better for adoptees. Or we can just stay in our little corner and think everybody hates us and we're mad at everyone. That gets nowhere. Yeah. We can just talk to our own echo chambers forever and just nothing ever gets done. So much better, I think, to collaborate and work together.
And just to pick up on the medicine, because I heard you say, Beth, something about your ancestor journey, and that's been very much a part of a couple of the journeys I've made, which is looking back, and mine happened to be all my female ancestors, but they'd been pulling for hundreds of years together. That's how change takes place. And they said to me, you're on the right path. Just keep going. But it's not going to happen in your lifetime, Leslie. Oh, really? But we've got to do it. It's this, again, the interconnectedness of all of us. And if we want more humane things happening in a more humane world, we've got to work for it. And we're not going to do it solo.
Yeah, in a way, it's like our community, when we're in a constellation space, we're really in a space, it's a sort of a mini cosmos of reparations.
Yes.
To some degree.
Yes.
And that's really hard if you're in the party, when you're in the space where you're the one who gained or has material privilege because of it. It can be really hard for other parties to feel that compassion for you. And so for me, I think what was so important about the individual healing leading to the collective healing is that the more pain you're in, the less space you have for anything else. I mean, if you've ever had a real bad toothache or you broke something or you had an infection, it blocks the sun and somebody else needs something and it's like, get away. But the more healed you are, the more generous in your spirit you are. And the more you can stay in that frame of mind of like, wow, we're all in this terrible container here. Everybody's hurting. because nothing will turn you into a narcissist faster than suffering. No one else feels your scraped knees and burned tongues. It's just you.
Right.
And so the more you can actually heal your pain, the more you can hold space for the pain of others and to try to understand them apart from the pain that you're feeling, because it's not, every time someone else is complaining about something because they're lost in their wound, it's not hitting on yours because you've healed enough of yours to where you're able to not bring it into the it's about me space and then get into this dueling banjo of the pain Olympics that can really happen in these spaces.
Yes.
And so for me, I saw that it was really about the more I do my personal work, the more I'm able to go into these spaces, and everyone else's pain isn't about me and doesn't come back to my own pain. It's not this boomerang effect. And I'm able just to be more gracious, or rather be more in the collective space of grace, or aware of this grace that fills the space, and not be another super angry adoptee who's yelling at everybody.
Wise. I totally agree with that.
And I always say, I think that is a developmental stage that we all have to go through. I mean, I didn't know how angry I was. We've all got to get it up and out. And that sometimes is best done in our own circles. But I even have faith that at some point we'll do that across the lines too, and do it well. I really feel like we're going to get there. But I think it's a developmental stage. I see so many new people, we all do, coming into the field, and boy, they're throwing the daggers and all that. And I just try to step back a little and give them room. And most people will get on through that period. There are a few people that get stuck there, but that's true in life everywhere. So be it.
So I think we're getting close to the end of our time here today. It's been wonderful to speak with the both of you. I thought maybe we could end on the note of thinking about this community and this constellation level healing. I feel like it's really blurry right now and slowly coming into focus as we and our communities think more about this. But just in terms of the fact that we are not only connected through adoption, but we're also connected through plant medicine, what would you suggest to your own subset communities, to those people who are interested in exploring plant medicines? What specifically would you speak to birth mothers, in your case, Leslie, about why and how they might want to pursue this, and things that maybe you wish you had known, things that maybe you couldn't have possibly known that surprised you in this process?
Mm-hmm.
If you could maybe talk to Leslie before she went into it.
Well, that one thing I'd reemphasize, especially to old Leslie's, is, this is not going to be a trip like you might have thought you had in 1966. So remember that.
Wow.
To take it seriously, but also to allow the compassion that develops. Allow yourself to take that further. And I think people naturally do. I don't feel like I'm telling something that people wouldn't, but that we begin to develop that compassion for the other groups. I think we mothers tend to have compassion for the adoptees in our lives because we've either set them on that course or picked them up at that depot. And we're dealing with all of those feelings. But I think sometimes the women get a little competitive, the mothers with each other. And I know I do a lot of sharing with my first mother, birth mother friends of, do you know that infertility is the second worst diagnosis you can get in the world? Cancer's number one. Infertility emotionally is the worst. And then I go through explanation about what that's about. And I think, well, but they should have dealt with that before they ever came here. And it was like, yeah, but there's a tick-tock clock going on about if you're going to be a mother, you might want to be one before you're 70. So you may have to not have dealt with all your infertility issues. So it's like trying to teach these other groups to hold a little more compassion for each other and not the competitiveness of who's the mother and whatever. But I just think that's real important, and that we can maybe this being a beginning of make a focus more on how can we come together? all of the different segments and how can we try to heal together? Because again, there is strength in numbers. And one of the things I say about this big adoption industry is remember that keeping us separate and fighting works well for them. Don't ever forget that. That's true in so many other areas of life, that if the downtrodden are kept apart and fighting with one another, they can't pick it up and change it. So I want to remind people that we got to learn to get along, and it's not that hard. And I want that to be more of a focus. So that's why I was excited that you two guys asked me to join you today. Thanks.
Yeah, Beth, what would you suggest to other adoptive parents who are curious and potential plant medicine patients?
I would sure love to see more adoptive parents in this space working on this with me. That would be amazing. And I think what I would like to let them know is that it's so easy for us adoptive parents to make our child the project. Our child is struggling with addiction or suicidality or mental health or attachment issues or whatever. It's very easy to make them our project and run them around to all these different places. But what I would encourage these adoptive parents to do is to go do our own work, because that will actually help our kids more than forcing them into stuff that they might not be ready for, or to make them feel like they are pathologized or something's wrong with them, they're broken. They're not broken, they're hurting. So if adoptive parents can just start looking more at what we can do inside our own soul and psyche for our own healing, and that will help our kids in the long run. And I also love the compassion that Leslie was talking about between the two other parts of this constellation, the two other main ones, the adoptees and the birth parents. And just if we can open up to have a bigger level of empathy and compassion for all of the pain that's going on around us in this whole adoption system, it's just fraught. It's just fraught with pain. So if we can all come together and go, yeah, this whole thing sucks. This whole thing is just a boatload of pain. And how can we help each other? How can we be more compassionate toward each other as we all are on our own healing journey?
Yeah, it's funny, as you both are talking about compassion, I'm seeing that one of the tensions that compassion has, because it's the antidote for so many things, right? But in this particular space, I'm recognizing how it's particularly an antidote to the way we protect ourselves. You know, both in terms of our own pride and all that, but also the way we protect our pain and our wounds.
Right.
And for any adoptees who are looking to do plant medicine, we have such huge, really deep protections up, because, you know, I think some of the rage and the anger for adoptees in this space, whether or not we realize it, is that we are the ones in this space that were 100% innocent.
Absolutely.
In this whole ordeal. It's not to say that there aren't very young birth mothers and so forth that have plenty of innocence, but to be a baby, to be a little kid is a totally different level. So I think that's where the anger comes up, but also there's a really fierce protectiveness. And just in my own work with plant medicines, I mean, it's been over a decade and I'm just getting to some of the really big stuff now, because it's like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. and and it never ceases to surprise me, the things that come up in the ways that I really protect and how fierce that I mean, it's the protection from like being a fetus and just, you know, the pre-verbal stuff. You can't even voice it. And you really need to have a solid support network in place. And you also really need to go slow, because the support network that you often think you have going into this, what happens is when you go deeper and deeper, you realize that the people around you aren't quite as healed as you think they are, and you can really trigger. And so sometimes people use the onion as a symbol, or a snake where you're peeling off layers. And sometimes those are relationships and people in your life that you don't stay on the same page with, because you're getting to a softer, more compassionate space. So yeah, for adoptees, I think obviously, I think it's a great way to heal, but also some of the hardest things that I came across, because we were innocents when this happened, but we are adults now. And so I've found that actually some of my most difficult ceremonies have been when I've had to take responsibility and I couldn't just blame the system or the adults around me. It was like when, oh, I really didn't make that better. I've really made a lot of these things a lot worse for myself. And maybe even though I have a right to be angry, and it's a totally righteous anger, maybe it's not helpful to express it in that way. Maybe there are other ways. Like, let's keep our eye on the ball. Yeah, that took some maturing, but you don't get invited to parties you don't know how to act right at. And some parties aren't worth going to, and these are parts of discernment.
Right.
That's right.
But yeah, it's always just about safety. And also because a lot of adoptees have been so disempowered that there's this process of getting your power back.
Right.
And when you move up in those stages and go deeper and deeper, it should be aligned with how much power you feel that you have, because you really don't want to get pushed and pulled in these spaces. When you go in, you really want to feel like you're where you should be and where you feel like you have power in your voice and your decisions.
Slow is a big word for me and with clients, but it's a little harder to use myself. But that is one thing I think is imperative in all of this is go slow, because you're learning so much about plants, about yourself, about each other. There's no rush. And that's our current way is hurry, 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 get it done fast. Do. And this is a place where slow is the best thing you can do for yourself.
And in a species and a culture where we're so compelled to belong for our survival, it is really difficult also to accept that this path, this healing path that you're on is yours. And at times it will be fast and you'll be maybe doing medicine regularly. And then there might be times when it's like, hey, I just need to integrate and go back into my life and see how things shifted and just feel it out.
Right.
Yeah. So to be able to be enough in your authority to take your own journey, if you're in a place to sort of make that your goal, that's really going to help you in this space.
Would you like to talk about the medicine circle, Miyoak?
Sure. Yeah. On July the 7th, I'll be hosting a circle for the entire constellation. So everyone's invited. I'll be a good solid ref so that everybody stays in their sandbox. But we're going to invite birth mothers and adoptees and adoptive parents who want to share a space where the healing that we're really seeking and honoring is greater than any of us individually. It will be produced and supported by Beth's Unraveling Adoption podcast. But everyone's welcome. We may not have time, depending on how many people, not necessarily everyone gets to share, but we will be able to come together and not only witness, because it's not a place just to come to kvetch. It's a place to come to really move ourselves toward a more healed place. And there can be a lot of power in witnessing. There can be a lot of power in hearing your own story in the stories of others, whether or not they're from the specific group that you're in, because we are all connected through our humanity. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a really beautiful space. So far, we've had it with only adoptees. But the way I see it is that when we come into these spaces, the thing that really unites us is that we're all unhealed children who come into this adoption space through the random lens that life has given to us. And so, yeah, it's going to be a place, hopefully, for compassion and for people to leave more healed than when they arrived.
What time is it on the 7th?
It'll be at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern.
Okay.
And just to be clear, it is kind of like a place to integrate transformations that have occurred for you through plant medicine. We are not using plant medicine during this 90-minute session. Sometimes people get confused about that. But maybe someday I can imagine a place, maybe in Costa Rica where Mee Ok works at Soltara, where someday we could have some sort of retreat where we could have the plant medicines together in some sort of safe community container. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
It would be. That would be a dream. Yes.
Well, and I am hosting a retreat in Costa Rica in November. You can find out more on my website, holdingcompassionate.space.
Okay.
And there will be quite a few adoptees there and people in the adoption constellations, because as far as I know, this is the first adoptee-led ayahuasca retreat of this kind. And so, so I'm really hoping that there will be plenty of people from our community there to really do this powerful healing together under not even the auspices of a person, but of the plants.
Nice.
Cool.
I'm hoping to be there, Miyoak. I'm going to try really hard to get there.
Yeah, I feel like the plants adopted me.
So
Yes. And I'm so glad you're doing this. This is exciting.
Yeah. Well, I'll put the flyer in the show notes. So if you're listening to the podcast, either scroll down or sometimes you have to scroll over to find the show notes, and there will be a flyer and a link to the registration for the Medicine Circle on July 7th, 2024. So check that out. And I'll also include Miyoak's ayahuasca retreat in November. So I'll put links to all of that below.
Great. I'll pass that around too. Great.
Great. Well, thanks so much, ladies, for joining me for this. I hope we get to do more in the future.
Love to.
Yeah.
Great.
It's really beautiful work to do with you both.
Same here, Miyoak. Same here. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Let's see where this leads. I feel really strongly that we're stronger together.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
I know we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
And like we always end our podcast, this was Joey's idea from the very start. Mee Ok, Leslie, and I want you all to stay
safe.